And now it is time to tell the final Finn McCool legend. I'm sure that some of you are disappointed to see this hero go. But if I were to sit here and tell you of all of his adventures, I would be sitting here until the end of days. Or, at the very least, 1,000 suns and moons would have risen and fallen from the sky. No, it is best if I let this giant bid his farewell and exit the stage. But before he does, allow me to share some of his most honorable adventures, the ones that made him famous throughout Ireland, or at the very least for a giant. And imagine yourself in a kingdom made of black stone, next to this great volcano and this forest of thorns. This is the kingdom of Samhain, and here live the people of Tara, a miserable people. For every 23 years a dragon would come and turn their city into ruin, and they did their best to defend themselves from this beast, but they would always fall asleep before it arrived. And so they called for a hero to save them, some knight who might be able to slay the serpent. And they waited until one day he arrived, Finn McCool, and promised to help them for a hefty reward, which they were more than willing to pay him, if he could get rid of the monster, that is. So Finn McCool sat there at the outskirts of the forest, and he waited for the dragon long into the hours of the night. And he did indeed start to become drowsy, but he had a secret. He had a magic spear, and every time he was about to fall asleep, he would put his hand on the red-hot tip, which was said to be like fire, and it would wake him up with a start. And he sat there, and he sat there, and he waited, and then, as he was about to fall asleep again, he saw it slithering down the mountainside, the dragon. Now, Finn McCool happened to be a part-time thief, so it was easy for him to sneak away. And as the dragon came down the mountainside, it was thinking of itself, of how delicious roasted human flesh would be, and how it was going to get so many jewels and rubies from the people of Tara. But it didn't even have time to blink, for Finn McCool came up behind it and stabbed it on the head with the spear. And the people of Tara rewarded him handsomely, and to this day, every 23 years, they hold a festival in his honor. Finn McCool had a lot more enemies than dragons. One of his most famous is one we've actually heard about from the Legend of Giant Causeway, although I don't think I referred to him by name. But allow me to refer to him by name now, Benandonner, one of Finn McCool's most famous nemesises. They got into quite a few brawls in their time, and once they were fighting on Benandonner's island, and Finn McCool knocked out one of his teeth and ran off with the evil giant's purse. And he was going across Giant's Causeway, and Benandonner got up, and he grabbed hold of his tooth, and he threw it out into the sea, trying to hit Finn. But the tooth flew, and it finally landed with a splash, and became what is now known in Ireland as Chicken Rock. And it is said that Finn McCool cursed this place, so that sailors to this day crash into it on stormy nights. I know that a lot of you think that Finn McCool might just be another giant to take the place of Paul Bunyan. But there is actually quite a big difference between the two. For one, Finn McCool could be a little bit more dishonorable, as you can tell. But also, he was much more, well, let's just say, we know a lot more about his sexuality, where Paul Bunyan kept it very secret. Finn McCool was known to love giantesses and was always wooing them. And perhaps one of his most famous loves was that of Siva. Siva was a beautiful giantess who lived out in the forest, but she had a curse on her. A dark wizard had turned her into a deer, and she was constantly running through the wild. And one day Finn McCool was walking down one of the trails with his dog, Bran and Shaika Long, And as they were walking, the dogs came up to the deer, and Finn noticed that they weren't trying to attack it, they were just sniffing it. And he realized that this must be an enchanted deer, and he took it home. And he happened to have a few magic textbooks, and he performed a few curses, and he performed a few spells, and finally he was able to bring Siva back to her giantess form. And they would have lived happily ever after. But one day, the dark wizard, having heard that the curse had been lifted, came for Siva and turned her back into a deer, and she ran off into the forest. And poor Finn McCool searched for her for years, but he was never able to find her. But one day, the dogs were able to locate this little doe, and they took it back home, and it was only just about a year old, and Finn McCool performed a few spells, and it became his son, Oshin. So that Finn McCool, although the bitterness of his lost love was still there in his heart, was able to feel a little bit joy that he actually did have a son. There was only one other woman I know of that Finn McCool felt any true love for, or at least was willing to marry, and that was Grania. Grania was a giantess who was the pride of Minnie, pride of her father Cormac for sure, and probably a lot of other giants that lived in her kingdom. But Cormac had promised her to Finn McCool. This was a problem because she was in love with Dear Mid. Now, Dear Mid and her were constantly going off into the forests, and finally one day they decided to run away with each other, and this made Finn McCool very angry. But he ended up making up with Dear Mid after a while. They talked it over, and they became friends. Or at least so it seemed. But one day Dear Mid was hunting, and a giant boar came in, and this boar was just as big as a giant, and it came up and it stabbed Dear Mid in the stomach and then ran off. And Dear Mid laid there, and he begged Finn McCool to go and get him help. And Finn saw that the stream of healing was nearby, so he ran over and he dipped his hands into the water, and he tried to go back, but the water went through his fingers. And he kept doing this, and it soon became apparent to Dear Mid that he was doing this on purpose, and that he had no intention to save him. Well, when Grania ended up finding out about this story, I don't know how she found out about it, but you know, word travels fast, and you can't keep anything secret in this world. She never did forgive Finn McCool. That is all of the stories that I have about him. As far as Ireland knows, he's going to come back one day, and he will come back when a horn is blown from a great giant. We here at the Fireside Tales do not believe that is the case. We believe his bones are buried on some mountain and in some other place far off. But I wanted to tell you all that I was considering getting rid of the Fireside Tales again. But I decided that you all would be disappointed by that, so I'm only going to do one tale from now on in 10. And I think that should make everyone happy. But I hope you enjoyed this story. Another book that we can put back on the shelf of the Fireside Tales.